After rejecting the 999th consort candidate my master, Madame Freya, had introduced to me, she finally reached her limit. What the hell are you waiting for? You're the once-in-a-lifetime genius of Nymphomist magic, and yet you've never gone through the Great Rite. You're not getting any younger, girl. At this rate, how are you supposed to improve your spiritual power? I sighed. Of course I wanted to find a consort and perform the Great Rite already. But every single one of those candidates looked like shit. Unfortunately, my absurdly high standards for men ended up stalling my spiritual power for too long. I failed to survive the trial of lightning and died. Then I opened my eyes and realized I was in another body, in another world. The beauty standards here were completely different from those in the elven world. I looked across the room, and my eyes immediately landed on the most perfect man I had ever seen. He was 6 feet 2 inches, with sharply defined washboard abs. His face looked as though the gods themselves had sculpted it. I ran straight toward him and threw my arms around his waist. Oh, he's the one. To my surprise, this god among men narrowed his eyes and grabbed me by the neck. Rage burned in his expression. You would throw yourself at a man as hideous as me just for my money? You disgust me. What the hell was he talking about? Honestly, all I could focus on was the way his sexy, seductive lips moved against each other whenever he spoke. Please. Just let me bite them already. I sensed cold steel against my wrists and shivered as I opened my eyes. A bed covered in pink sheets came into view, but my attention quickly shifted to the man standing against the light. The sight of him immediately set my throat on fire. He stood at least 6 feet 2 inches, his compact frame carrying an unmistakable air of dominance. The first 2 buttons of his dress shirt hung open, exposing the sharp outline of his collarbones and the smooth, powerful planes of his chest. But his face. Holy shit. Those deep, endless eyes. That sculpted, almost elven nose. Those thin, supple lips pressed into a seductive frown. I gasped. My gaze locked onto his washboard abs and refused to move. He was a god among men. There was no way he could be anything less. Ha. Oh Lord. This fine specimen had spoken, and his voice carried a magnetic, sensual baritone. The sound clashed sharply with the deep self-loathing woven into his tone. I knew it. It doesn't matter if I'm the richest man in the world. Even money can't soften this cursed, hideous appearance. His expression darkened. Now that you've seen how repulsive I really am, get out. He bent toward me and unlocked the pink handcuffs around my wrists. Frankly, I was too stunned to move. How the hell was I supposed to process the insane thing he had just said? A dreamboat like this was calling himself ugly? The man dialed a string of numbers and barked coldly, "Get your daughter away from me." The door opened, and a middle-aged couple entered with nervous, lowered heads. They were probably the parents of this body's original owner. Both trembled visibly, though disgust still flickered through their fear-stricken eyes. "And Mr. Valencia," my bum of a father stammered. "I swear, Cher is genuinely in love with you. Please accept her feelings, sir. Let her stay." My equally awful mother rushed to add, "Yeah. And if you could invest in our company, Cher is all yours. But of course, I can assure you she's here of her own volition." I stared at them in disbelief. Had I really just watched a couple try to barter their daughter for money in this day and age? Did I hear that right? I was practically half undressed over here, and instead of reacting to that, these two were openly trying to sell me off for cash right in front of me. Mateo Valencia suddenly let out a scornful laugh. "Eyes over here, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. Surely my future parents-in-law should like me enough to want me in their family, right? So look at me. If either of you can stare at me for more than 10 seconds without looking away, you get your money." My crappy parents exchanged excited glances before turning toward Mateo. "That's almost too easy, Mr. Valencia. You're such an exceptional young. Fine. Emma, aw." My father gagged uncontrollably, and Mateo's mood darkened at once. The air in the room seemed to turn cold. "Fantastic. Just fantastic," Mateo snarled. Meanwhile, I stared at him in complete fascination. Crap. He looked so hot when he was angry. I couldn't hold back anymore. I lunged at him and wrapped my arms around his slender waist. The force of the movement buried my face deep against his muscles. Oh God, he smelled incredible. The instant our bodies touched, a wave of pure, nearly tangible energy seeped into my skin. It poured straight into my source, the place where all my spirit energy was stored. Shock rippled through me. This godly man was more than eye candy. He was a literal mother lode of the power I craved. He stiffened violently. "What the hell are you doing?" He tried to shove me away, but I moved faster. My hand slipped beneath his shirt and traced the hard warmth of his abs in all their glory. "Oh, the shape of you, these ridges and edges." I moaned, drunk on the sensation as I leaned down to kiss his deliciously compact abs. Now this is what I call a true man. Mateo froze like he'd been struck by lightning. You just kissed." Mateo looked pale. Confusion battled across his face, breaking through his usual cynical expression. "You don't think my abs are disgusting?" I shook my head wildly and fixed my gaze on his chest. I grabbed one of his pecs and squeezed. These muscles had to be sculpted by the gods themselves, handsome. Who the hell would think they're disgusting? I meant every word. His musculature looked sharper and more refined than that of my fellow Nymphomist peers who devoted themselves to swordplay and combat. Mateo's body jolted at the sensation of my grip. He stepped away from me as though my hand were a burning iron. Fury slowly replaced the panic in his eyes. Enough, he roared, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. The sudden movement sent me flipping backward onto the bed. Memories rushed into my mind. Damn. Now I remembered what kind of world this was. It was no wonder Mateo kept insisting he was hideous. The masculine beauty standard here was completely different from the elven worlds. In this world, the hottest men had to be around 5 feet 3 inches, weigh 200 pounds, and possess flat, rotund faces with barely visible necks. The larger and rounder, the better. On the other hand, a man with an exquisitely sculpted body and face like Mateo's would only be regarded as a freak of nature. I inhaled sharply and looked at him again. My pleasant surprise had evolved into sheer ecstasy. This man had been bullied since childhood for his ugliness. His parents hated him, and his peers ostracized him. Even after becoming the richest man on the planet through his ruthless business acumen, people still would not stop talking about how no amount of wealth could make him easier on the eyes. No one had ever wanted to pursue him romantically. Hell, the only reason the original owner of my body was here was that her parents had forcefully separated her from her childhood sweetheart and dragged her into Mateo's bed for the sake of money. Madame Freya had once told me about men like this. There was no easier target under the sun than an insecure man who had never been loved. My eyes drank him in again and again. I had never felt so satisfied with my luck. And those sexy lips. Their shape alone was mesmerizing, and the way the light caught their color made them even more irresistible. What would happen if I kissed them? Would I absorb even more energy that way? God, I could barely contain my excitement anymore. I lunged again and pressed my lips against his with precise, reckless force. The world went silent. My parents looked so stunned that I swore their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Mateo froze as his eyes widened further and further. Spirit energy, 10 times more powerful than what I had absorbed earlier, surged through our mouths and flooded my entire body. It poured into my barren source, rejuvenated my veins, and nourished my starved body so thoroughly that I nearly moaned. Unable to help myself, I flicked my tongue across the corner of his lips as though searching for stray drops. Mateo shoved me away in shock. I stumbled and crashed back onto the bed, surprised that it didn't hurt at all. I turned my focus inward toward my source and realized that a wisp of energy had begun filling the emptiness inside me before forming a weak barrier around my organs. Hot damn. So this was the only way for me to recover my lost magic, intimacy with him. I caught the fear and shock in Mateo's eyes and decided to press my advantage. I pounced like a homing missile and grabbed his thighs. He reeled backward, dumbfounded, then stared down at me with a mixture of bewilderment, humiliation, and disgust. This is how low you'd go for money. I looked up at him, love practically bubbling in my eyes. Excuse me? Forget money. Letting a manifestation of masculine hotness like you walk free is the real loss I can't afford. The entire room gasped. A faint blush spread across Mateo's face. He was blushing. Then, hesitantly, he asked, "You are not repulsed?" How could I posse? Suddenly, the door burst wide open. A short, rotund man barreled inside, breathing hard as he grabbed my hand. "Don't be scared, Cher. I've come to rescue you. We shall flee together." The man who had just shattered the doorframe was, by this world's standards, an absolute specimen of peerless male perfection. He stood roughly 5 feet and 2 inches tall. His neck had long since surrendered to a magnificent, cascading triple chin that merged seamlessly with his collarbone. His chest and stomach formed a majestic, singular sphere that strained the seams of his designer silk shirt, and his cheeks were so round and flat that his nose looked like a tiny, sunken button in the middle of a fresh loaf of dough. "Cher," the round man wheezed, his eyes watering with theatrical devotion. He struck a pose that he clearly thought was smoldering, though it mostly made him look like an overinflated beach ball trying to balance on 2 toothpicks. "I heard your wicked parents sold you to this hideous beast. Fear not, my love. I have come to tear you from his grotesque clutches." My mother let out a loud, dramatic gasp, her hands flying to her cheeks. "Oh my God. Toby. It's Toby Higgins. He's even more breathtakingly handsome in person. Look at those magnificent rolls," my father whispered, tears of genuine awe welling in his eyes. "A true prince among men. To think our daughter almost threw her life away on a tall, bony freak when a god like Toby was willing to elope with her." I stared at Toby. Then I stared at my parents. Then I looked back at Toby. My stomach did a violent, unscheduled flip. This was the childhood sweetheart? This human potato was the man my body's original owner was crying over? The sheer visual assault of Toby's handsome face almost made me lose the spiritual energy I had just successfully absorbed from Mateo. I instinctively recoiled, retreating a step and pressing my back firmly against Mateo's broad, rock-hard chest. Mateo stiffened behind me. I could feel the sudden, icy drop in his body temperature. His hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, his gaze dropping to the floor. The familiar, crushing weight of his deep-seated insecurity settled back over him like a suffocating shroud. Mateo said, his voice dropping into a flat, dead whisper that cut through the room like a razor. The handsome Mr. Higgins. I suppose the farce is over. Then. He gently but firmly tried to pry my hands off his waist. Go on, Cher. Your knight in shining armor is here. You don't have to force yourself to look at me anymore. No. I yelled, my grip tightening on his belt loops with the strength of a drowning sailor. Are you out of your mind? I'm not going anywhere near that gremlin. Silence fell over the room. It was so absolute you could have heard a pin drop. Toby's self-satisfied smirk froze. His tiny, bead-like eyes blinked in utter confusion. See, Cher? What did you call me? A gremlin? Yes, a gremlin. A troll. An absolute geological disaster of a human being. I snapped, poking my head out from behind Mateo's shoulder but refusing to let go of him. Look at you. You look like a thumb that's been slammed in a car door. How dare you barge in here and call my gorgeous, sculpted, absolute masterpiece of a man a beast? Cher, my mother shrieked, looking as though she might faint from horror. Have you lost your mind? How can you insult Mr. Higgins like that? Look at his beautiful, flat face. Look at his perfect, necklace silhouette. He is a top-tier model. And you are insulting him for that? She pointed a trembling, disgusted finger at Mateo. For a giant skeletal freak who looks like he was carved out of spare firewood? You all need your eyes checked. I roared. Mateo was staring down at me, his jaw slightly slack. The sheer bewilderment in his dark eyes was almost comical. He looked like a man who had suddenly been addressed in a language that didn't exist on this planet. Cher, Toby stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry purple that made him look remarkably like a bruised eggplant. I know you're just saying this because he's threatening you. Or maybe you've been traumatized by having to look at his repulsive face for too long. Come here, let me hold you. My soft, round arms will make you forget this nightmare. He took a step toward me, reaching out with short, stubby fingers. The sight of those fleshy little sausages coming toward me triggered an ancient, primal survival instinct. My Nymphomist spirit energy, though still incredibly weak, bellowed in protest. Get away from me, you walking marshmallow. I instinctively gathered the tiny wisp of magic I had just cultivated from Mateo's lips. Channeling it down to my fingertips, I flicked my wrist. A faint, shimmering pink mist erupted from my hand. It wasn't enough to cast a full spell, but it was more than enough to create a sudden, localized burst of high-pressure wind. Boom! The draft hit Toby square in his massive midsection. With a loud OOF, his center of gravity failed him. He tipped backward, rolling like a bowling ball down the hallway, knocking over a priceless vase in the process before coming to a stop against the opposite wall, groaning miserably. My parents let out twin shrieks of terror. She's possessed. The freak's ugliness has driven our daughter mad, my father screamed, grabbing my mother's hand. Run. Before she tries to kill us too. They didn't need to be told twice. Abandoning Toby, who was still struggling to roll himself back onto his feet, my parents bolted down the corridor as if the devil himself were chasing them. I dusted off my hands, letting out a satisfied sigh. Well, that resolved itself nicely. I turned back around, ready to sink my teeth into Mateo's lips again, only to find him staring at his own hands, then at me, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. What did you just do? He whispered, his voice trembling. And why did you call him a gremlin? Because he is one, I said simply, stepping closer and cupping his sharp, perfectly defined jawline. But more importantly, handsome, do you have a lock on this door? Because we have a lot of lost time to make up for. Mateo didn't lock the door. Instead, he grabbed my wrists, gently this time, though his grip was still firm enough to make me shiver, and pushed me back onto the plush pink mattress. Stop, he commanded, though the authoritative edge in his voice was severely undermined by the rich, dark flush creeping up his neck. Who are you? The Cher Monroe I investigated was a timid, fragile girl who spent her days weeping over Toby Higgins and writing poetry about his glorious, soft stomach. She would never look at me without vomiting. I winced inwardly. Wow, the original owner of this body really had tragic taste. Well, the old Cher is dead, I said, leaning back against the pillows and stretching my legs out languidly. I made sure to let my gaze wander slowly down his chest, lingering on the sharp, beautiful V-line disappearing into his trousers. I had a near-death experience, saw the light, and realized that my taste in men was utterly, catastrophically garbage. Now, my eyes have been open to the truth. And the truth is standing right in front of me, looking like a literal god. Mateo winced, flinching as if my compliments were physical blows. Do not mock me, he growled, turning his back to me. He began pacing the room, his long, powerful legs eating up the space. I am well aware of what I am. I have spent my entire life being reminded of it. My parents hid me in the basement when guests arrived. The media calls me the tragic billionaire. Because no amount of money can buy me a normal, handsome face. Even the maids here wear blindfolds when they clean my personal quarters so they don't have to look at my sharp features. I stared at him, my heart aching with a bizarre mixture of profound pity and intense arousal. Blindfolds? For this face? These people were utterly insane. Mateo, I said, slipping off the bed and walking up behind him. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arms around his waist again, pressing my cheek against his broad shoulder blades. The moment our bodies connected, another warm, delicious wave of spirit energy surged into my source. It felt like drinking a cup of hot cocoa on a freezing winter day. My magical core hummed in sheer delight, greedy for more. I am not mocking you, I murmured, my voice softening. I swear on my soul. To me, you are the most beautiful creature in this entire world. Those soft, round men look like bloated corpses to me. Your sharp nose, your deep eyes. These muscles, this is what true perfection looks like. If the rest of this world is too blind to see it, then let them be blind. But let me look at you. Let me touch you. Mateo stood entirely still. I could feel his heart hammering like a trapped bird against his ribs. You're lying, he whispered, but his voice lacked its previous venom. It sounded fragile. You want my money. Your parents' company is on the verge of bankruptcy. You staged this elaborate act to get me to sign the investment papers. Then don't sign them, I said, slipping my hand upward, feeling the ridges of his ribs, the hard plane of his chest. Let them go bankrupt. I don't care about their company. I don't even care about your money. If you want, you can strip yourself of every single cent you own, and I will still drag you to my bed and ravish you until neither of us can walk. Mateo gasped, a low, choked sound escaping his throat. He turned around in my grip, his hands coming up to grasp my shoulders. You really mean that? He asked, his eyes scanning my face with a desperate, searching intensity. He was looking for any sign of deceit, any flicker of disgust. But all he found was my shameless, undisguised lust. Every single word, I breathed, rising on my tiptoes. Now, are you going to keep talking, or are you going to let me appreciate, more of your beautiful body? He stared at my lips. I could see the internal battle waging in his mind. He had been starved of touch, starved of love, starved of any form of validation for 26 years. To have a woman looking at him as if he were a delicious meal was a temptation too great for any mortal man to resist. He leaned down, his breath warm against my skin. But just as our lips were about to touch, his pocket vibrated violently. Mateo froze. He closed his eyes, letting out a sharp, frustrated breath that sounded remarkably like a growl. He pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen. His expression instantly hardened back into the cold, ruthless mask of the world's richest businessman. What is it? He snapped into the receiver. He listened for a moment, his brow furrowing. The board meeting? Yes, I am aware. I will be there in 30 minutes. He hung up and looked down at me. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a calculating, quiet intensity. I have to go to the headquarters, he said, adjusting his collar and buttoning his shirt, much to my immense disappointment. But you are not leaving this house. Oh. Am I your prisoner now, handsome? I teased, leaning against the bedpost. You are my guest, Mateo corrected, though his eyes lingered on my lips for a fraction of a second too long. I am going to investigate you thoroughly, Cher Monroe. If I find out this is a trick, or that you are working with my rivals to humiliate me, the consequences will be severe. And if it's not a trick? I countered, arching an eyebrow. Mateo paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't look back, but I could see the tips of his ears burning a bright, delicious red. If it's not a trick, then we will discuss the terms of your appreciation when I return. With that, he swept out of the room, leaving me alone with a rapidly replenishing magic core and a very, very hungry heart. While Mateo was away, I didn't waste any time. I sat cross-legged on the pink bed, closed my eyes, and began to map out my new body's spiritual pathways. The physical vessel of Cher Monroe was incredibly weak. She had zero magical talent, which made sense given that this world seemed to have no concept of Nymphomist magic or spirit energy. However, my soul was that of a genius. Now that I had successfully anchored myself to this body, my source was slowly reforming. And the key to accelerating that process was Mateo Valencia. He's not just a man, I muttered to myself, a manic grin spreading across my face. He's a walking, talking, incredibly sexy ley line. Nymphomist magic relied entirely on the exchange of vital essence and physical intimacy. In the elven world, we had to carefully select consorts with high spiritual compatibility to perform the Great Rite. But Mateo's compatibility with me was off the charts. Just a simple kiss had restored enough of my magic to cast a minor wind spell. If I could actually get him to go through with the Great Rite. I shivered, my core turning hot at the mere thought. I would probably become more powerful than I ever was in my past life. But first, I had to deal with the practical realities of this world. I wandered over to the vanity mirror and took a good look at my new face. Cher Monroe was actually quite pretty by my standards. She was slim, with delicate features, pale skin, and long, curly brown hair. However, because she was skinny, she was considered a plain, undesirable woman in this society. Well, their loss is my gain, I hummed, picking up a hairbrush. Just then, the door to the bedroom slid open. A middle-aged maid stepped in, her eyes firmly covered by a thick, black silk blindfold. She navigated the room with practiced ease, holding a tray of food. "Miss Monroe," she said coldly. "Mr. Valencia ordered that you be fed. Please eat quickly so I can remove the tray. And please, do not make any sudden noises. I do not wish to be startled by the master's presence if he returns." I stared at her. "Are you seriously wearing a blindfold because you're afraid of looking at Mateo?" The maid shuddered, her shoulders tensing. "The master's face is a curse. It is a tragedy that a man of his wealth must carry such a deformed, skeletal countenance. I pray for his soul, but my eyes cannot bear the sight of those sharp, deep-set eye sockets. It gives me nightmares." I slowly shook my head. This world's beauty standards were a literal mental illness. "You know," I said, reaching out and gently tugging the blindfold off her face. "Ah. What are you doing?" The maid gasped, instantly squeezing her eyes shut and covering her face with her hands. "Are you trying to blind me?" "Open your eyes, you idiot," I said, my voice dripping with authority. "Look at this room. Is Mateo here?" She slowly opened one eye, looking around frantically. When she saw the room was empty of Mateo, she let out a massive sigh of relief. "Miss Monroe, please do not do that again. If I accidentally glimpse the master, I will have to scrub my eyes with holy water." "Listen to me very carefully," I said, leaning in close. "Mateo Valencia is the most beautiful man to ever walk this earth. If I ever catch you or anyone else wearing a blindfold around him again, or treating him like he's a monster, I will personally throw you out of this mansion. Do you understand?" The maid stared at me as if I had grown a second head. You really are mad. The rumors are true. You've been driven insane by the trauma of being sold to him." "I'm not insane," I smirked, taking a bite of a delicious strawberry from the tray. "I'm just a woman who knows a good thing when she sees it. Now, tell me, where is Mateo's wardrobe? If I was going to seduce a billionaire, I needed to dress the part. And more importantly, I needed to prepare for the long game." An hour later, I had bypassed the mansion's security, with a tiny touch of compulsion magic that I managed to squeeze out of my newly restored source, and found myself in Mateo's master suite. His closet was an absolute wonderland of high-end tailoring. Rack after rack of custom-fitted suits, silk shirts, and cashmere sweaters. I ran my fingers over the fabrics, inhaling deeply. Every single item of clothing smelled of him, that intoxicating mix of cedarwood, cold rain, and raw, masculine power. My knees went slightly weak. I picked out one of his oversized, white silk button-down shirts. I stripped off my ruined, ridiculous pink dress and slipped the shirt over my shoulders. It was massive on me. The hem fell halfway down my thighs, and the sleeves completely swallowed my hands. I left the top 3 buttons undone, exposing my collarbones and a teasing hint of skin, then tied a silk sash around my waist to give it some shape. I looked in the full-length mirror and smiled. Classic. Simple. Devastating. Just as I was admiring my handiwork, the heavy oak doors of the master suite swung open. Mateo stepped in, looking exhausted. His tie was loosened, and his jacket was draped over his arm. The moment his eyes landed on me, he froze. His gaze swept down my bare legs, up to the oversized white shirt that smelled of his cologne, and finally rested on my face. A heavy, thick silence filled the room. Mateo's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The jacket in his hand slipped, tumbling soundlessly to the floor. What are you wearing? Mateo's voice was barely a whisper, thick and raspy. Your shirt, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Do you like it? I think white is definitely my color. Though, to be fair, it looks much better on your chest. Mateo took a step back, his back hitting the closed door. He looked like a man trapped in a cage with a very hungry predator. Cher, this is highly inappropriate, he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if looking for an escape route. I am a businessman. I have rules. Rules are made to be broken, handsome, I purred, closing the distance between us. I pressed myself against him, feeling the delicious contrast of his cold, structured suit jacket against my bare thighs. I reached up and slowly slid his tie completely off his neck, tossing it aside. My investigators found nothing, Mateo muttered suddenly, his hands hovering awkwardly near my waist, wanting to touch but too terrified to make the move. There is no plot. Your parents are genuinely bankrupt, and they genuinely tried to sell you to me. But they are furious. They are telling everyone in high society that you have lost your mind and are worshipping a deformed freak. Let them talk, I whispered, my lips brushing against his collarbone. They're idiots. The whole world is full of idiots. There is a charity gala tonight, Mateo continued, his voice straining as my hands slipped beneath his vest, tracing the hard lines of his abdomen. It is the biggest social event of the year. Every major family will be there. My rivals. They want me to show up. They want to mock me. They've even invited Toby Higgins as the guest of honor because of his unmatched, divine beauty. I let out a loud, mocking laugh. Toby? The walking potato? The guest of honor? Yes, Mateo said, his expression darkening with a familiar, painful shade of humiliation. Normally, I do not attend. I stay in the shadows where a monster belongs. But tonight, they have made it a requirement for a major land acquisition deal I need to secure. He looked down at me, his eyes full of a strange, tentative hope. Will you come with me, Cher? Will you stand by my side even when the entire world is laughing at us? I stared at him, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective rage. This man was a king. He was a brilliant, wealthy, incredibly gorgeous king, and these lesser, rounder creatures were treating him like a circus sideshow. Go with you? I smiled, my fingers tangling in his dark, silky hair. Oh, my darling Mateo. I wouldn't miss it for the world. In fact, I'm going to show them exactly what a real man looks like. The grand ballroom of the Imperial Hotel was a sight to behold. It was dripping in gold, crystal chandeliers, and some of the most hideous people I had ever seen in my entire life, both past and present. Men who looked like overgrown beach balls paraded around in tight, custom-tailored tuxedos that looked ready to burst at any moment. Women with heavy makeup swooned over them, fangirling over their glorious necklace structures and magnificent, soft double chins. It was a literal gala of the goblins. Look, there he is, a whisper rippled through the crowd. Oh God, the monster has actually shown up. Is he trying to ruin the aesthetic of the evening? How can someone be so tall and skeletal? The whispers were venomous, but Mateo kept his chin held high, his expression a cold, impenetrable mask. Only the slight tremor in his hand, which was currently resting in the crook of my arm, betrayed his anxiety. I was wearing a stunning, backless emerald green dress that clung to every curve of my body. It was a bold choice, considering skinny women were supposed to hide themselves in baggy, shapeless sacks. Just ignore them, I whispered to him, leaning in and kissing his cheek. The crowd gasped. Did she just kiss him? Without vomiting? She must have a stomach of iron. I heard she went mad. Look at her, she's skinny too. A match made in the trash heap. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and Toby Higgins waddled forward. He was wearing a custom white tuxedo that made him look like a very expensive marshmallow. Beside him was a wealthy heiress, a woman who weighed at least 250 pounds, who was looking at him with adoring, starstruck eyes. Well, Toby sneered, his triple chins wobbling as he spoke. If it isn't the freak of nature and his madwoman. Cher, I see you haven't recovered from your mental breakdown. The crowd chuckled, nodding in agreement. Toby, Mateo said coldly. Move aside. And if I don't? Toby smirked, stepping closer. What are you going to do? Valencia? Scare me with your sharp, terrifying cheekbones? You are a blight on this city. If it weren't for your money, you'd be locked in a zoo where you belong. Mateo's grip on my arm tightened. He was about to step back, to retreat into the shadows as he always did. But I wasn't having it. I stepped in front of Mateo, shielding him from Toby's repulsive gaze. You know, Toby, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. I've been trying to figure out what you remind me of. And I finally got it. Toby puffed out his chest proudly. A Greek god? A masterpiece of masculine form? No, I smiled sweetly. A bloated tick that's about to pop. Seriously, if someone poked you with a needle, would grease or gravy pour out? The crowd gasped. Several women flinched as if I had blasphemed in a temple. You insolent bee, Toby began, his face turning dangerously red. And as for the rest of you, I turned, addressing the entire room, my eyes flashing with a sudden, dangerous spark of pink magic. You call this man a monster? You call these carved, perfect features a curse? I reached back, grabbed Mateo by his lapels, and pulled him down into a deep, breathless kiss. This wasn't just a kiss of reassurance. This was a declaration. I poured every ounce of my soul into it. I parted his lips, my tongue tangling with his in a slow, possessive rhythm that made him groan against my mouth. As we kissed, a massive, unprecedented wave of spirit energy erupted from him. It wasn't just a wisp anymore, it was a roaring, torrential river of raw, primal power. My source didn't just drink it, it feasted. The weak barrier around my organs shattered, replaced by a brilliant, radiant shield of pure Nymphomist magic. The air in the ballroom began to grow heavy, thick with the scent of wild roses and sweet, intoxicating honey. A faint, pink mist began to roll off my skin, coiling around Mateo and me like a protective cocoon. When I finally pulled back, Mateo was panting, his eyes completely dark with desire, his lips slightly swollen and glistening. He looked so incredibly, devastatingly beautiful that half the women in the room, despite their societal conditioning, involuntarily let out soft, confused sighs. Hear me, you blind, miserable fools, I declared, my voice echoing with a subtle touch of magic that made everyone in the room tremble. This man is mine. Every sharp line, every perfect muscle, every inch of his gorgeous face belongs to me. If any of you dare to call him a monster again, I will personally show you what a real nightmare looks like. This is outrageous, a wealthy old man yelled from the back. Security. Throw these freaks out. For large, muscular, which in this world meant incredibly round and slow. Security guards stepped forward, raising their batons. Oh, you want to play? I smirked. Now that my source was fully awake, my magic was no longer limited to minor tricks. I took a deep breath, drawing on the massive reserve of energy I had just taken from Mateo. I raised both hands, my fingers curling as if pulling invisible strings. Nymphomist art, roseate bind. I whispered. The pink mist in the room suddenly solidified into thick, thorny vines made of pure light. They erupted from the marble floor, wrapping around the security guards' ankles and pinning them to the ground. What is this? Magic? She's a witch. The crowd erupted into sheer panic. People began running for the exits, screaming in terror as the beautiful, glowing vines spread across the ballroom, creating a breathtaking, surreal forest of light. Toby tried to waddle away, but a vine caught him by his plump ankle, tripping him. He hit the floor with a loud, wet thud, rolling around like an upturned turtle, screaming for mercy. I paid them no attention. I turned back to Mateo, who was staring at the glowing vines, then at me, with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. You, he whispered. What are you? I'm your savior, handsome, I smiled, stepping into his arms. And right now, my magic is overflowing. We need to leave. Now. Mateo didn't hesitate. He swept me up into his arms, carrying me bridal style. As he strode through the panicked crowd. For the first time in his life, he didn't look down. He looked like a conqueror, holding his most precious treasure. By the time we returned to the penthouse, the air between us was practically vibrating with static electricity. Mateo carried me straight into his master bedroom, slamming the heavy oak doors shut with his foot. He set me down on the edge of the massive, silk-sheeted bed. But he didn't pull away. His hands were trembling as they cupped my face. Share, he breathed, his forehead resting against mine. I don't care if you're a witch. I don't care if you're a demon from another world. When you kissed me, when you defended me tonight, I felt something I have never felt in my entire life. What did you feel? I whispered, my hands already busy unbuttoning his shirt. Wanted, he said, a tear finally slipping down his cheek, catching the moonlight filtering through the window. I felt wanted. My heart melted. I pulled his face down, wiping the tear away with my thumb. You are wanted, Mateo. More than you can possibly comprehend. I pushed his shirt off his shoulders, finally revealing the full, magnificent glory of his chest and abs in the dim light. My spirit energy screamed in anticipation. The final barrier in my source was pulsing, waiting for the ultimate connection. It's time, Mateo, I murmured, my voice dripping with ancient, elven seduction. It's time for the Great Rite. The Great Rite? He asked, his voice thick with desire. Just trust me, I whispered, pulling him down onto the bed with me. And don't hold back. What followed was a symphony of magic, flesh, and raw, unrestrained passion. The moment our bodies fully merged, the atmosphere in the room shattered. A blinding, golden pink light erupted from our bodies, filling the entire penthouse. The sheer volume of spirit energy flowing between us was astronomical. It wasn't just a river anymore, it was an ocean, a supernova of power. My Nymphomist magic reached its absolute peak, wrapping around our souls, binding us together in a contract that transcended worlds, space, and time. Mateo let out a low, primal roar as the energy washed over him, his muscles locking, his body radiating a divine, otherworldly glow. The magic didn't just empower me, it flowed back into him, healing the deep-seated trauma in his soul, filling him with a supreme, unshakable confidence. We rode the wave of energy until the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the room in soft, golden hues. I woke up tangled in the silk sheets, my head resting on Mateo's chest. His heartbeat was slow, steady, and incredibly reassuring. I closed my eyes and checked my source. It was completely full. In fact, it was larger and more stable than it had ever been back in the elven world. I was no longer just a genius, I was a literal powerhouse of Nymphomist magic. Good morning, my love, a deep, velvety voice murmured above me. I looked up to see Mateo smiling down at me. The cold, cynical businessman was gone. In his place was a man who looked completely at peace, his dark eyes glowing with a faint, residual hint of my pink magic. You look breathtaking, I said, kissing his collarbone. I feel different, Mateo said, running a hand over his abs. Stronger. More alive than I ever have. That's the power of the Great Rite, I laughed, tracing a pattern on his chest. We are bound now, Mateo. Our souls are linked. As long as we are together, no one can ever hurt us. Good, Mateo smiled, his eyes flashing with a sudden, ruthless sharpness. Because we have a lot of work to do. He picked up his phone, which had been buzzing incessantly with news notifications. I leaned over his shoulder to look at the screen. The front page of every major news outlet was covered in photos from the gala. But the tone of the articles had completely changed. The Demon King of Valencia? Billionaire Mateo Valencia displays unfathomable power. The end of the round era? Are sharp features the secret to supernatural might? Toby Higgins hospitalized with the bruised ego after being rolled over by magic vines. The world was in an absolute panic. The display of my magic had completely shattered their comfortable, stagnant worldview. They didn't know whether to fear us or worship us. They're terrified, Mateo said, a dark, incredibly sexy smirk playing on his lips. My rivals are trying to pull out of our deals, but they can't. I own 80% of the city's infrastructure. And now, they know I have a wife who can control the very earth they walk on. Fiancé, I corrected, nipping his chin. You haven't bought me a ring yet. Mateo laughed, a rich, booming sound that warmed me to my core. He flipped us over, pinning me against the soft mattress, his dark eyes burning with that familiar, delicious hunger. I'll buy you a ring carved from the largest diamond on this planet, he whispered, his lips hovering a millimeter from mine. But first, I think we need to make sure your magic is fully charged for the day. Oh, definitely, I grinned, wrapping my legs around his waist. We wouldn't want me running out of power, would we? 6 months later. The world had completely changed, and so had its beauty standards. It was funny how quickly people's minds could be changed when faced with absolute, overwhelming power. The moment they realized that Mateo's deformed body was actually the vessel for a godlike spiritual energy, and that my skinny form was capable of summoning forests of light, the old standards crumbled like dust. Suddenly, gyms were popping up on every corner. Men who used to gorge themselves on lard to maintain their glorious roles were now desperately lifting weights, trying to sculpt even a fraction of Mateo's legendary washboard abs. Women were throwing away their baggy sacks and wearing tight, form-fitting dresses, trying to emulate that sovereign style that I had popularized. But no matter how hard they tried, there was only one Mateo Valencia. And he belonged entirely to me. We were standing on the balcony of our new penthouse, overlooking the glittering skyline of the city. Mateo was wearing a custom, open-collared black suit that showed off just enough of his chest to keep me constantly distracted. I leaned against him, my round, diamond-encrusted ring catching the moonlight. You know, I murmured, sipping my champagne. My old master, Madame Freya, would probably die of jealousy if she saw me right now. Oh? Mateo asked, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Why is that? Because, I turned in his arms, looking up into his sculpted, perfect, beautiful face. She spent hundreds of years trying to find me a suitable consort. And I found the absolute greatest one in the universe in a world that thought he was an ugly monster. Mateo smiled, his dark eyes full of an endless, devotion-filled warmth. I was a monster, Cher, he whispered, leaning down. Until you loved me into a god. Then let's go show them what gods do, I whispered back, pulling him down into a kiss that set the night sky ablaze with shimmering, pink light.